Coming up next on the SPNN Forum, we'll have a conversation with Daniel Banks, General Manager of KFAI Fresh Air Radio. Hi, I'm Martin Ludden, Executive Director of St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and we're here in the Kwame McDonald studio at SPNN for a forum conversation with Daniel Banks, General Manager of KFAI Fresh Air Radio. Daniel, welcome to the forum. How are you?
Hey, Martin, thank you for having me. I'm doing pretty well.
It's great to have you. KFAI and SPNN are both community media organizations in the Twin Cities. Can you tell us about KFAI? Where can we find KFAI? What's the mission? What are you guys up to?
Yeah, absolutely. KFAI, hopefully you know it. We've been around in the Twin Cities just now for 43 years, since 1978, broadcasting out of the West Bank for most of that time, last 30 years. But broadcasting out of the West Bank, but should be reaching almost everybody in the Twin Cities metro area on 90.3 FM on your dial, as well as on the web at kfai.org. We've grown to try to reach everything that this internet age has brought. KFAI is a station that, above all, is mission-driven and volunteer-driven. What our purpose is really is to bring entertainment, arts, and information to our community where it's critical, and specifically for our diverse audiences in the Twin Cities. And as we do in community media, particularly for those audiences that are either misrepresented or even ignored by larger media entities. And I think we see a strength in that diversity in trying to provide unique pockets of resources where we don't see them elsewhere. And our overall mission really is to provide understanding between people's communities. We are a single community here in the Twin Cities, but we also want to connect to one another. And I think that putting shows that are radically different, but also radically relevant to our community alongside one another in the schedule.
Yeah, I want to come back to that representation thing, but first I want to give you a quick chance because KFAI has been around for 43 years, as you said. That's longer than you or I think, have been walking on this planet. But you're relatively new to KFAI and to the Twin Cities, right?
That's correct. I am East Coaster from Massachusetts. Don't ask about my sports team's alliances. I cannot tell. But I'm relatively new to the Twin Cities, it's true. But KFAI just represented something so exciting to me, and really nothing against those other community radio stations out there, but I was in radio at the time, or had worked in community radio, and KFAI really embodies what I think community media could and should be, which is extending in so many directions to serve the community in really whatever way it can, doing it at whatever cost, what's reasonable. But I'm relatively new. I came here to try to further this mission, and particularly after the uprising and in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, it just became even more critical, in my opinion. You know, this is coming from an outsider, but to do the work here, and I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to dig into this community and meet the people who make it work and who have committed themselves.
Yeah, you mentioned so you were on the East Coast. You talked a little bit about the technology. You know, we can catch you locally here at 90.3, but were you aware of KFAI, you know, outside of this market?
And actually, that's a funny thing. We have, in this role at KFAI, talked with a number of other community radio stations around the country. Be interested to talk to more television stations like yourself, but we've talked to a number of community radio stations around the country, and KFAI is a known quantity. And I think that's one thing that I'm hoping to try to impart to the people at KFAI, which is that they have something going on, and I want to further it and help it grow. But KFAI has been known in the long history, as you noted, for really pushing forward and pushing boundaries with being a well-programmed, professionally done, but completely volunteer-driven station. And when I say volunteer-driven, it is both that we are member-supported, of course. We rely on member support, but all of our hosts on air are volunteers. They are community members who care. They care about the community, and they care about the content that they're putting on the air, whether it is music that you're not going to find anywhere else on the dial, or whether it is public affairs content that is just specific to our Twin Cities locale and maybe even specific to our neighborhood. That's the idea that we have, is to be a catch-all there.
Yeah, I think that's, Steve, who's in the control room right now, talks about wanting to create content here that's relevant locally, but viewable nationally or globally. And I think that's what you're talking about with KFAI as well, is it's relevant locally, but you can hear it and have it make sense and matter in Boston or LA or Berlin or wherever.
Well, that's the thing. And it's a really funny concept in community media these days, because lots of community radio stations popped up in the 70s and early 80s, along with a wave of long-haired, bright-eyed folks clad in a lot of tie-dye. Great, fun people. And they're still kicking now. They really started community radio revolution. And I think a lot of stations, KFAI included, have wondered in the 21st century, in what I would call the age of the internet, because it is so defining in human history. What does it mean to be community radio when you can click link X, or not even, just scroll when somebody's already posted link X for you, to listen to anything you want, when there are streaming services out there. And we believe, of course, that there is still a reason for community media to be around. And I think it's in two ways. Fundamentally, we believe that community matters on a local level. And I'll get back to that one. But also, I think KFAI is actually really pushing to engage on this, or in this global community. We have programs, and I'm thinking some of our Somali news programs, especially Somali Damanta, Somali Public Radio, that represent some of the best resources for information on the Somali diaspora, on Somalia itself. And we have people tuning in from countries, continents away to catch it, because Minneapolis represents actually one of the strongest bastions around. And I think it's interesting on our level to see it just as one of the shows in the schedule, but where some of these shows go, like these Somali programs, like Disability in Progress, incredibly well done, super relevant for people it's relevant, that people will tune in from all over to catch them. And it's that catch-all idea, and it kind of flips around the internet as well. I will add, we are doing, of course, the podcast thing. We're doing web shows. We have 2 internet streams now that run parallel to our broadcast. The internet's not the enemy of community radio, as we see it. It's actually a really exciting opportunity to spin our mission and become relevant, still with a community focus, but to even more people in new ways.
Yeah, we found for us, for the first time through this pandemic, doing virtual programming, like we had to tell people what time zone we were in, and that was that's completely new. It's being such a hyper local organization. It's like, well, yeah, it's at 6, and then we got phone calls. Is that 6 Central? Because I'm in Pacific time. It's like, awesome, welcome. Yes, it's 6 Central. But yeah, and it's like, but you also, when you talk about kind of the Somali diaspora and that center in Minneapolis, I think there's also an important thing that you're doing and that we're doing around representation, which you mentioned earlier, which is like KFAI is a place where a Somali kid can go and listen to somebody on the radio who shares his lived experience. And that doesn't happen without community media.
Absolutely. And I will shout out our allies in this work, KALY, who are a low power FM station serving the Somali community here. Check them out along with KFAI, please.
Yeah.
But community media is rich, and there's a lot if you look for it, and it's really there for you. In terms of being there for individuals and having something for everybody to listen to, like that you were talking about, that absolutely holds true. KFAI has almost 10 languages on the air, which is something, not to point fingers at other stations, but it's something that you're not going to find too often.
Right.
Because as a business model, it's a little bit strange.
Right.
And that's the strangeness but also wonder of KFAI is that you're not going to love every show, most likely. You might not. You'll probably learn something in every show.
Right.
And the shows that you might not initially dig or that you might not even be able to understand because they are in a language that you might not speak, for other people in our community, for our neighbors.
Yeah.
Those film programs are critical, and they'll listen to the ones that you love, and that's where common understanding comes in. It's a pretty special power. Speaking of where community radio and media comes in the internet age, there's a pretty special power in creating a schedule where, yes, it's just 90.3 FM on the dial, but depending on when you tune in, and if you stay long enough to get the full scope of what's going on, and we hope you do, you will be tuned in to a lot of channels. One channel, but many channels in our Twin Cities community.
Yeah, that's really well put. And we share, building common understanding is a part of SPNN's mission statement too, so we share that as well. One of the things, you talk about, you're a volunteer-run station, and we host a lot of member-created content. And so that there's a two-way nature to what we're doing, which is like, yes, there is there's a thing that you can go and listen to, and that's a benefit to whoever's listening. But also, there's a whole nother group of people who's creating, and so it's not just a benefit to the listeners or the viewers, but it's a benefit to the creators. So can you talk a little bit about how your volunteers, work and what they're doing and what the benefit is for them as well?
Wonderful question. Our volunteers do it all. They are amazing. They are what keeps the station going. I'd say we're volunteer driven. We have a staff of 4, and for a schedule that has over 100 volunteer hosts that make the programming that keep KFAI going. And we have more community members who volunteer in other capacities, whether it's helping with production to keep shows going, whether it's coming in to join us in our pledge drives that you just love to hear on air. But it's fun, we promise. And it's actually a really good way to join us and engage in community itself. I know one of the things that surprised me the most and made me the most happy when I did come here as somebody who is fairly new to the KFAI community is that it is the KFAI community. It is a group of people that constitute a community itself within Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's not just the radio station that broadcasts to the community. So I want to thank everybody who is a participant and invite everybody who is not. The hosts the volunteer hosts that keep KFAI on the air come from all over the Twin Cities, and they come from a variety of backgrounds and with a variety of interests. And our goal as KFAI, pretty simply, is to support those interests, because we know that each individual represents not just an individual, but the community that they're from. Some are smaller than others, and some need more media attention than others. And KFAI has really made an effort throughout its history to be diverse, be there for everybody. And I want to reaffirm that commitment in the future to all the volunteers who are on the air. We love them. We have watched them succeed and create amazing resources or just amazing entertainment for our community, but entertainment that you're not going to find elsewhere. Whether it's odd Australian hits or it's some people are into it, or it is a public affairs program that's talking about our Black community in the Twin Cities and exactly what's going on. The people that are volunteers are leaders in our community, and I think that our service is through them. They do everything, and KFAI's goal really is to provide platforms. In a world where the internet theoretically provides a platform to everybody, don't go on blogs. Too many platforms sometimes. But it can be hard to compete and hard to get your voice out there. And I think that what KFAI does is provide a way for people to get their voices out there and get them directly to our local community, to really reaffirm that in a time like we're living in.
If you're just joining us, we're here on the SPNN Forum. I'm in the Kwame McDonald studio at SPNN, and Daniel Banks, General Manager of KFAI Fresh Air Radio, is joining us via Zoom. Daniel, you mentioned that you came to the Twin Cities, I think, in August of 2020?
That is correct.
Yeah, so immediately following the murder of George Floyd, towards the tail end of a summer of a lot of kind of renewed movements for racial justice and uprisings in that vein. How has that impacted the work that you're doing at KFAI? And I mean, what a time to come into this community.
I want to say that the struggle for racial justice is something that I identified with pretty personally. Even not being from here, it's something that we've all been struggling with, or we all should be struggling with. Wherever we've been. And that's kind of what drew me here, is to support. My position is not to go on the air every day, but to support people that are and try to make sure their voices are heard. But I also want to acknowledge the people who have been here through the murder of George Floyd and before. I mean, we in Minnesota, we've had problems, and I say we now because I feel part of that we now, but we've had real problems. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to acknowledge everybody who has been there through that, and who has done something, said something. And I think that posts on KFAI, a lot of them have been those people who have used those platforms as community leaders to say something. And in the wake of George Floyd's murder, they officially announced it as such recently. KFAI took a couple approaches. The fact that it coincided with the pandemic meant that the station was already, as you might be familiar with, as another media organization in the cities, it was struggling to make production work, to make sure that we could keep our 24-hour, 7 days a week schedule going. And we were able to, through the hard work of our team, flexibility of our volunteers, figure out ways to pre-record shows, to do live remote tapings, to make it work, to keep radio going. Because the thing about the pandemic and the time after George Floyd's murder is that everybody's wondering, where's community? What is community? Mm-hmm. What does this mean anymore? Like, the divisions are so clear. And there are still absolutely divisions that are worth addressing. But KFAI, I'm excited that KFAI stepped up to the occasion. Before I came and after I came, that represented interviews with local leaders as well as politicians about what was going on, about how they could engage deeper with their community, with the movement, with every aspect of it. It also includes hosts not being locked into cookie cutter programs. That's one of the excitements of KFAI, is that while we not just bring a wide variety of programs, but when hosts know something pressing is going on, they're able to take a moment, pause, and speak to it.
Yeah,
they are community leaders, and that's how we want them to wield their voices. Of course, no hate speech, nothing offensive, things like that. We do have rules, but we want people to use those platforms, and we want them to use them to make a difference and to say something. And additionally, we also partnered with various organizations to get messaging out there. And I guess this is touching on the pandemic as well, partnering with the Minnesota Department of Health, the census, because when we were divided, especially through the pandemic, it's hard to reach people.
Yeah.
And I think for me personally, and clearly for members of our community, from whom we got a lot of excited calls just saying, thank you, we're really glad you're on the air. Radio was a place where people could connect. And when you couldn't meet at, location X, where you always not just hung out with your friends, but met with your neighbors and community members, and couldn't do that, the community was on the air. And one last thing on this point, I think that every organization at this time should be grappling with these issues still.
Yeah.
A year out, we should still be going to grapple with these things, because it's not just the murder of George Floyd. There was much, much more that even preceded it and continues to go on, regardless of which events get the most press coverage. And I think KFAI has started to take some hard looks at itself this past year. And one of the joys of community media is that we are a reflection of the community, but also being a microcosm in that way, it means that we've had to look inward and look at issues.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're still going through. It's an ongoing process.
Well, and community is beautiful and vital, and it's messy, right? And, to meet those needs of such a broad community is both, I think, the blessing and the opportunity and the struggle of the work that we do, and providing that window into community and that outlet for community to speak their truth and their experience, and to use the resources that we have actively and intentionally to make a difference. That's what we get to do every day. Daniel, thank you so much for the work you're doing, for the time you gave us here at SPNN on the forum. Welcome belatedly to the Twin Cities. I hope you continue to find it a place that you can do good work and have a living and a life, because we sure like it here. I'm glad you do too. So thank you for that. This has been a great conversation with Daniel Banks, General Manager of KFAI Fresh Air Radio. We're here in the Kwame McDonald studio at SPNN. Thanks for tuning into the forum, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.